brain hurts. Oh, hey, I'm alive. Okay, so this is going to be one of those things that will only exist for a while and then I'll blow it up or something. This is Lobster Logic. Welcome. You know who I am. I don't care anymore. My brain hurts. Oh, that was hard. That was difficult. That was difficult. Um, I got nothing. I mean, just the fallacy that I heard over and again was appeal to personal incredulity and appeal to ignorance. And I can't figure out another way. I can't see another way. This is what I think it is. It's like, uh, so I have to see this done, or else that then only if people do it in this certain way will that prove it. It's like, and you can come up with something that nobody will ever be able to demonstrate to you, and then be like, aha, see, I'm right, because nobody can show me I'm wrong. And it's just not the way things work. Anyway, so I invited a bunch of people. I doubt anybody's going to show up. But if anyone shows up in chat, I'll talk to them. And if not, then I'll explode this, and nobody will know that this was even a thing, I guess. Because this is me complaining about what I just did. So if you were there for that, then you'll join this. And if you weren't there for that, then you won't. Although I didn't tell anyone that this would be a thing, so I don't know anymore. My head hurts. I mean, it's so exhausting. Because you know that you can't just you know that you can't just crush the person, you gotta be it's like something I've finally uh maybe gotten good at now. Hey, I got somebody. What do I have?
Hey,
Hey,
it's,
how's it going?
it's Chris.
Hey, Chris. What did I throw you? Did I throw you in here? The right?
Yeah, yep, you sent me a link
Yeah.
over email.
Yeah, I was just seeing who I could get to join me on this lobster hangout. We're live, by the way, so don't say or do anything you don't want to know live. But I'll blow up this video later, so it probably won't matter, I guess. What? Oh my God! What are all those toys up there? I want to play with all of them.
Oh,
Let me play with the toys.
I'm a
Ooh,
collector of mech.
ooh, mech warriors. Is that mech warrior?
Yeah, it is.
I remember.
Mech, I've got the entire MechWarrior video game
Oh my
collection
God! I remember
in big box.
there was this place we went to when I was young, and like you sat in this giant uh chair, and there was like a bazillion switches all around you, and it was like a mech you were driving.
Oh yeah,
And
the Tesla pods.
yeah, I don't remember what the hell it was, but it's like, okay, it was like, I don't know, $10, $15, $20 to do it or whatever. And but the school had paid for it, so but it was like, okay, all these switches apparently do something, but it's just controlling the thing and walking around, and it was like so immersive because all the screens around you. uh and I imagine today it could be even better than that. Although I'm not, I think you'd probably use a VR headset instead of a giant room like that. But maybe you'd want the switches. I don't know. And then there was a Mech Warrior miniature game that I believe WizKids did.
Yeah, that was the Dark Ages. That was based off of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what we're. Yeah. I don't care what I was going to talk about. That's what we're going to talk about now. Okay. So. Okay, what's comparable for mech warrior? Because I know there's mechs in 40K universe, and I know the only mechs I know of that I would know anything about is from Robotech. So let's say an SDF, not SDF, that would be too big. The let's see, the the one that Rick Hunter flies, the Veritech fighter.
Oh yeah. So actually, there are probably quite a few in MechWarrior you would actually recognize, because MechWarrior actually copy pasted 22 mechs from Robotech.
Oh, did they? Yeah,
Yeah,
you know what I was going to say.
they got sued out
There's
the ass for it.
Nautilus or Dreadnought. There's something with like it's got armed cannons on its shoulders, like it shoots
Oh yeah,
out.
the monster.
Yeah, yeah, and that was on the one of the two ships that the SDF-1 had actual naval vessels as its arms, and
Yeah.
the Daedalus assault was like they'd punch that through and then open it up, and there'd be all these mechs shooting out things like you got hit and then you got shot inside the hit.
Yep. But like for example, the rifleman here.
Mhm.
So this is
Yeah,
called
that
rifle.
looks a lot like something that you might see. Right.
Yeah. So this one was this is called Rifleman in the MechWarrior BattleTech series, but he was the Robotech Defender originally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Man.
there's the Spartan, which is the BattleTech Archer.
Oh my god, that looks like even it could transform. But none of these
Or
transform.
there were like the Valkyries and stuff,
Yeah,
which
the
were
Valkyrie. Yeah,
BattleTech
exactly.
Stingers.
That is a Valkyrie. I mean, that's not from MechWarrior, is it?
Oh no, yeah, it was in MechWarrior. They
Oh
they
my
copy
word!
pasted it in there. They also
Oh,
copy pasted this
oh,
Valkyrie.
that's that's Roy Falker's Skull One, I think, or it's in Rick Hunter's. I think that. Oh
Yeah.
wow. So yeah, I'm guessing they got sued big time.
Oh yeah. They got their they have been continuously sued even after completely redesigning them. They are still sued to this very day over it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't, I mean, you gotta like change it a lot. Like I know that, like even with Transformers with Jetfire, because he's straight from Macross, like they just repainted it, and so it's like, yeah, it's like they can't use Jetfire. Like they had to like do it, like so he looks totally different. And even now, it's like, you're still kind of like,
Technically, by United States law, there only has to be what amounts to a 15% difference for them to be legally able to use them. But the company Harmony Gold is absolutely ravenous.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I wish is that I had all the Robotech. I have all the Robotech books, and the series diverged from the books. That's during. Oh, they had Shadow Wars or something that was kind of close, but it was like I don't know what the hell they're doing now. But yeah, and I wish that they had been able to reboot the series and follow the books, because I thought the books were really cool and good, and I thought it gave a good conclusion to the story and made sense. But whatever. I don't know. They do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to follow. BattleTech had a series of like over 100 books or something, and I followed most of it. I've kind of fallen off lately because it just gets weirder and weirder as time goes on.
Yeah, it just explodes or whatever, and you can't. After a while, you can't keep up. Like
Yeah.
you probably like now, because I think WizKids stopped producing the mech stuff. You could probably get all the mechs for fairly cheap, but like when it was going, there would have been no way, to keep up
Yeah,
with it.
well, I mean, actually, with a lot of these models right now, like, so for example, there you are. My favorite one right here is the Timberwolf.
Oh, I want that. I want to play with that. I want to transform it. I want to shoot things.
Uh,
Does it shoot? What's it do? Make it do stuff.
no, it can't. It can't really do things, but
Wow.
I mostly just love these for collector's value, and then also because I have a lot of childhood nostalgia over them.
Yeah. Are those things you built, or they all come pre-made?
Most of them I built. This one I didn't. This one only came. This was a special edition model right here that only came in like one set, and these were done by Joyride Studios back in the early 2000s, and they currently run. I mean, this one alone runs around $300 or $400 now.
Yeah, I was gonna say like at the time it was like what 100 or 150 or something.
At the time, you could get them for $40
or 40. Oh wow, that's really good.
Yeah, and these were plastic and die-cast metal.
Nobody is watching this. video. Nobody cares about what we're talking about. I just got out of a hangout. You would have loved it. And by love, I mean the other thing.
Well,
What are you up to these days? What are you doing besides MechWarrior? You got all these
I'm honestly
books.
not doing as much.
Yeah, notice I didn't care anything about this. I was like, oh my god, toys.
I'm not doing a whole lot right now. At least fun wise, the only thing I'm doing for fun at the moment, outside of I really get enjoyment out of academic pursuits, but
Yeah.
aside from that, like hobbies, I am restoring a Texas
Oh
Instruments
my god.
computer.
That's not a TRS-80, though.
No, it's a TI 99 4A.
Yeah. The Trash 80. That was the classic we
Oh
had.
yeah, the Trash 80 Radio Shack. I actually
The Radio Shack TRS-80. Called it the Trash 80. Everybody.
Yeah,
I don't know if everyone.
I actually have one in storage that I'm going to be getting out. I like to collect old computers. I just love them. But yeah, mostly right now I'm just working on academic stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, I know people do with Commodore, especially Commodore 64. But the Bandersnatch, I don't know, for Black Mirror. Did you ever watch that?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't watched it.
Oh, okay. But you should, because it's a great episode. I actually haven't watched it on Netflix, so I saw Bandersnatch with no edits, and it's like weird because it's set up like a story. You're supposed to click, and it will take you to different parts of the story. And so when you watch it without the machine code behind it, you just watch this entire sequence of events. It's like, what the hell's going on? I don't know. But it still made sense as a story somehow. But it's supposed to be like a choose your own adventure. But embedded in it is a game for an old computer. And I forget which one. And somebody like made an emulator or had an emulator for that computer and put it in, and it was like, oh yeah, there's a game. It's like, oh my god, they really like were thinking of like levels and levels, with this project they did.
Mm-hmm.
It was just amazing. And the whole thing about the choice, or do we have a choice, or is it illusion? Because the character has to get to the end, has to get to an ending. But you kind of pick the ending, but then again, do you? Like, is there any choice at all? It has these branches, so it's like, what's that say for free will? We don't have any options. I don't care. Whatever. What do you think about Ariel not being the right gender? I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to be mad at anymore. Twitter's like, I'm just like, no, yeah, I give up. You win. I'm not mad at anything now. I don't care. Yeah, there you go. You won. I'm apathetic to everything now.
My honest opinion on the whole Ariel situation is, it's a fairy tale character.
Yeah, I don't care.
Make out do what you want.
The Scarlett Johansson's not playing is. She's going to be playing a trans person or whatever. It's like, oh no, only trans people can play trans people. Like, what? Really? There's a rule? Well, I didn't know there was a rule. Okay, what? I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. Do whatever you want. I'm out of it. I don't care. I just don't care. Well, what about don't care?
I completely.
Back in Shakespeare's day, the guys would play girls. So but.
I completely understand the apathy. Twitter is making me more apathetic. Honestly, if anything, Twitter is just making me misanthropic.
Yeah, it's like, oh look at what Trump. Look, if I see more, I was like, if I see one more thing about, oh look, Trump, and I was like, nope, I don't care anymore. Whatever, go away. I don't care. Do whatever. Nuke it all. I don't care. Leave me alone. I just want to post silly things and cat memes. What happened to the internet I used to love? A kinder, simpler internet.
Yeah.
Oh man. But anyway, so what else other than the what intellectual things are you doing that
Um,
nobody? Go
I'm
ahead.
working on 2 book projects right now.
Hmm.
The first is I'm working on a book going over methodology for assessing parallels in ancient literature, and the topic of it is specifically focusing on dying and rising gods.
Right, I remember you were doing some memes about that, or blasting away the memes. I think it would be the
Yeah,
right way, because I've seen those, and I was like, really, I don't know, it's like because you never know with memes whether they're correct or not. It's just always just go, yeah, whatever, I don't know. But all those are pretty much Horus. I think is a big go-to for there's like.
yeah.
So,
The
are there comparable comparisons between Horus and Jesus, or that is all of that just wildly incorrect?
so when we for me, when I decide to talk about parallels and trying to assess them, like between Horus and Jesus, I, I've been trying to set up a more strict methodology for doing that. So, like my first rule is if you have to oversimplify or generalize things to get a parallel, then you haven't actually got a parallel. All you've done is created your own artificial thing,
Mm.
and
Like,
that
because
is
he died, and wasn't he split into like several parts?
no,
Or
that was Osiris.
okay. See, I knew
Um,
somebody was like
yeah,
you can't really say that that's a dying. Like, yeah, he died and came back, but he died, got taken into parts, and then came back after they put the parts together. That's a little bit different than the Jesus story. Just
oh yeah. Well,
and
see,
then Paul took the foot of Jesus. you know.
oh, see, with Horus, what they generally focus on is there is a single uh, attestation of a myth where Horus is stung by a scorpion and then is brought back to life
Okay.
by magic powers of Thoth. Now, it's really questionable though, because it is a magic stela. It's not necessarily a mythological one, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what they actually believed about Horus. It is strongly associated with magical spells that are meant to relieve people
Mm.
from poison.
Yeah, and even if it did, I mean, that's still not. I mean, it's like okay, you have somebody dying and coming back, but it's so different that it's. I
Right.
don't know. Would you like? It doesn't have to be exactly obvious. Like
Right.
there.
No. Yeah.
It just has to be. It's like okay, so yeah, how do you decide when it's too different to not be comparable versus like what's the methodology there, or you're still working on
So basically what I argue, I argue for a basically a tiered system of how how we should go through uh, our our methods. So the number one is it is before we assess anything, we have to remember that if we have to generalize or oversimplify things, then it's not a real parallel. The second one is that we cannot hyper define parallels out of existence, i.e., we can't just point to parallels and then define them in such minutia that we cannot assess anything.
that. Hmm.
So that's basically what apologists do when trying
Right.
to reject any parallels to Jesus. Then, uh, basically, after that, what we do is then we can try and assess things. If we find a parallel, which is an actual parallel, the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that until later steps come along, it's allegorical. So we cannot assess that the parallels have any relationship with each other yet. So we can't assume that they have a causal relationship, because just because they are parallel does not mean that they have a connection. That is the cum hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy.
Mm.
Uh,
Right.
and then another step that we have to remind ourselves is that if a parallel precedes another one, that does not mean that the um, latter was caused by the former. That's
Mm.
the post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Right. It almost sounds like you know what you're talking about.
I've
Give you a
been
rough
doing
time there.
extensive research on it. I'm mostly psychologically. I am also going at this from a psychological basis as well, and I'm coming at it from
Well, certainly
the work of Boyer.
there there was this one guy that I talked to who said that the other flood myths that exist are because there was a big giant worldwide flood, rather than the ones that came before it were why that it's like no, they're similar. There's flood stories throughout time. It's like no, that all points to the same flood. I'm like
No,
no, because you have different times. Like no, but they didn't know the times when they wrote it. I was like, what the? So everything confirmed the belief rather than the other.
right.
It was like
It
no, it's
becomes
just
circular.
yeah, it became so circular, and I was just like, I was like, what about the other flood stories? Well, they all confirmed the flood. I'm like, no, because they came before. Right, that means they confirmed the flood. I'm like, what? Like, because that was the flood. I'm like, so there's no date of when the flood happened. Right, exactly. Oh, okay. So they all can be the flood story because there's no date. But why is that? Why do people tell the same story? I mean, obviously, flooding happens not everywhere, but a lot of places.
Yeah.
So that makes sense as a story. But there's other stories that we seem to be telling each other again and again. There's a reason for that, I'm sure.
Well,
Or
yeah.
maybe there's not. I don't know.
It depends. So a lot of it comes from common environment. For
Mm-hmm.
example, I hate talk. One thing I despise is talking about archetypal gods.
Yeah, archetypes.
Like
right.
lumping them into categories. They didn't. The categories don't exist.
Mm.
So it's really problematic. But for the sake of ease of discussion, so like when we talk about like sky gods, for example, like On or Ale or from other societies, one thing that we can keep in mind is that every society has access to the sky. So there's a common environment for those gods to come from. Now the problem is what it doesn't mean to be a sky god. That differs in every different culture. Every religion is culture specific. The problem, which is why archetypes are borderline useless.
Hey, James! James! No, he's not there.
I'm
James?
here.
Oh, there you are, James! How's it going, James?
What's the conversation?
Oh, we're all over. This is Christopher here. He's well, I don't know. What are you? I can't even describe. You're human. I know that.
I am currently an English major, working towards eventually going to graduate school so I can get a PhD in Hebrew Bible.
Because you want to show that that's all. It's to be able to really challenge those that have that faith and be like, I've got a PhD too. Suck it.
Well, I'm not really going at it with any wish to do a scorched earth approach myself. But I mean, if
that's what you're gonna do when I'm done with you,
though. it does come with the territory to a degree, though.
Do you agree with the idea that like somebody had said to me that theology can't ever progress because it's all about the tradition in a sense? But I mean, obviously it changes over time, but at the same time it can't progress. So like, well, it's weird. But
I'm skeptical of that claim myself. I think that it depends on how you define what progression is. But I think that because theology is basically just a branch of philosophy dealing with a specific realm of ontology, epistemology, and metaphysics.
Why does your computer sound like an airplane?
Mine?
Something. I know it's not James, although that would be funny. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, it might be a fan I have going on.
Yeah. The conversation I had leading that was before this melted my brain. You guys would have loved it. That's great. Yeah. You'll watch it later and be like, oh.
Anyway, what is the conversation? No
yeah,
one
the
answered
conversation now.
question.
I don't know. We
We were talking about how we talk about and assess parallels between Jesus and other gods before that.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of been all over the place, James. So I mean,
Yeah, we started
whatever.
with Mech Warrior.
It's whatever we want. It's whatever you want to talk about, really. Because I did a hangout. I talked to a young Earth creationist. I just couldn't. He doesn't, there was nothing I could do for him. It was at least civil, unlike the last time we had a young Earth creationist. Remember
Mhm.
that, James?
Right.
That was,
Okay.
yeah. But so I couldn't. Yeah, this guy was basically the same two fallacies he repeated was personal incredulity and ignorance. Because well, I
Right.
can't think of another explanation other than a mind that the cell is this complex and blah blah blah. It's like, but it wasn't always that complex. But even if you go way back, it's still 12 things, and that can't be anything other than a mind. I'm like, well, there you go. You've made up your mind
Right.
what it is. It's like, well,
Right.
scientists
Mhm.
have to do this thing, then then I'll believe this. And I'm like, that's not how anything works. Like, it shouldn't be up to somebody else to disprove you. It should be up to you to prove it to them. And it's like
That's right.
he didn't know logic. He didn't know. He thinks he knows science, but he doesn't. And my brain hurts. So now we're just talking about whatever. And
So now the conversation has switched to. So your name is Christopher, is that right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I just threw him and you in here to see who I could get to talk to me about
Okay.
whatever random stuff that had nothing to do with the other hangout because you
Okay.
guys
Well.
weren't there. But anyways,
Okay. So Christopher, you're gonna take Hebrew, correct?
I'm currently taking it right now, and then I'm teaching myself Ugaritic and Syriac right now as well.
All right.
yeah, he's a skeptic, by the way. Just
And your religious affiliation is, if you don't mind me asking?
Philosophical agnostic.
All right. So let me ask you this question. Have you spoken to a rabbi who can speak Hebrew fluently?
Yes,
Okay.
I've spoken to 5.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, because I did the same thing. And so when you learn Hebrew to an expert degree, I would guess, because you're going to have a PhD, yeah?
That's the hopeful plan.
Okay. What are you going to do with this knowledge of Hebrew?
My plan is mostly I just want to try and come to a better understanding of the ancient cultures that specifically I want to study ancient Israel and help people come to a better understanding of how things like the Hebrew Bible came into development and the religious, political, and ideological context that it all grew up in.
Okay, let me ask. So one of the reasons why DM may have brought me on, I don't know, is because I have a
just threw
tendency to
people
ask
in
some
here.
crazy questions. Okay, so why would understanding Hebrew specifically tell you what was going on in that particular culture that didn't necessarily speak Hebrew? Do you understand what the question? Because
Yeah.
an archaeologist doesn't care about that. And that's where culture comes from. It's not from the language specifically. So when you got someone over there digging in the ground, it's more than just understanding Hebrew. It's understanding Aramaic. It's understanding, because this is what I studied. I took religious studies. And to get to the bottom of religious studies, what understanding Hebrew would be, from my point of view, would be, let's say that you're going to have a debate with someone, a Christian, let's say, and he starts claiming things of why Jesus did this or Jesus did that. And you knowing Hebrew would be able to go back to the original text and say, yes, but that's not how that translates. And those people in their particular culture at that time, from what we know, would not have understood what you're saying because that's Aramaic is what you're talking about, et cetera, et cetera. Do you understand where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So,
so why are you taking that rather? It wasn't that Hebrew like the most spoken, or is that Aramaic then?
Yeah. So the most common language, it depends on the era. Hebrew
right.
Hebrew was only a local language to Israel, and then The lingua franca in the surrounding region was Akkadian up until the Persian Empire conquered the Palestinian Levantine area, and then Aramaic was instituted as the lingua franca, and Hebrew eventually got taken over by Aramaic. Hebrew eventually just became a liturgical language, and by the first century BCE to first century CE, it had almost likely died out as a common spoken language. Definitely by the second century CE, it was gone.
Okay, so let's say that we could draw a spider web and show where all of these languages crossed over, mixed, merged, etc. How does that get to us to understanding the culture?
Okay, so one of the most important things actually with language and with culture is how cultures decide to use language. So for me, for example, it is very interesting for us to see religiously how they decided to apply and use certain terms from other languages or in their own, and how they gave specific etymologies for them. For example, taking the name of Moses, which is an Egyptian name, but then giving it a Hebrew folk etymology instead. It tells us a lot about could tell us either A, that they did not know the Egyptian, which might be but then we can look at the political schema of the time. The Egyptians had a strong presence in the area, so a trained scribe who's writing the book of Exodus, there's a decent chance he probably would have had some knowledge of Egyptian, especially because that was a common particle in Egyptian ruler names, and Israel was a vassal of Egypt.
So is your argument that the Hebrews used the word in Hebrew translated from Egyptian, the word Moses, because Moses was a common name used in Egypt? Is that your argument?
Well, it was a common name in Egypt, but what the Hebrew authors, in my opinion, decided to do was actually hide the fact that Moses was Egyptian by giving him a Hebrew folk etymology.
Okay, so let me ask, DM, do you like what I'm asking this guy or not?
I mean, do you guys do you? I mean, this is there's no rules or rhyme or reason to any of this. So do whatever you want.
Well, you invited me in, and I'm just going somewhere with some questions. And
Christopher, you guys are great at asking questions. I know that, and I think you'll enjoy each other. So go at it.
All right. Okay. So I'm only doing this, Christopher, because I studied the Socratic method, and I'm really good friends with DM. So I'm just going
if he gets annoying, let me know.
Oh, all right. Fine.
Okay. So all right. So, do you at this point in time believe that Moses existed as a historical figure?
Ooh.
I do. I do acknowledge that I am in a minority position, but but as such, I am in a minority with very notable scholars like Dr. Heath Durrell on this.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you. You've got one scholar that believes this is the case. Can you say that the consensus of scholars believe that Moses was a historical figure?
No, the consensus is by and large that he was a legend.
Okay, and so how does your theory of this word translating from Egypt and borrowing this fit in to the concept of legend? So how would that undermine your theory?
It definitely can play into the concept of legend, given that if Moses was a legendary figure, it would make sense that the meaning of his name could have been lost, or they didn't know the meaning of his name, or they just took his name from Egyptian without understanding what the name meant. It could, and given that that Moses does definitely come from a pretty old tradition, especially if the Song of the Sea is any indication in Exodus chapter 15, then it likely could have just been that his name, the meaning of his name as part of legend, was just lost or mythologized.
Okay, I want to understand, if I might, that what is the difference, because this is something that I got confused on when I talked to you a while back was that like you're like, well, Jesus like probably existed. I'm like, well, but he's not like the Jesus that we read about. Like, so what's the difference between a person that happened to have the name, whatever that name might be, versus the legendary figure that like, if somebody was named Dan Green, but they, flew through space like Superman, I'd be like, well, other than my name, I see no similarity. So what's the distinction there?
What I'm just going, my position on that is that I think it's an unnecessary dichotomy. And the reason I think that's the case is, like, take for example, Augustus Caesar. Augustus, by my reckoning, scores 12 on the rank Raglan hero archetype, which by Carrier's methodology is actually enough to render him in the mythological camp. And that is because there was a strong mythological legend built up around him. He was a healer. He was said to be a son of a god. He ended up. There's actually an account where he did not die but transcended into heaven, where he then became among the stars, and a whole bunch of other wonderful things like that. The problem we have is that we know for a fact that Augustus Caesar existed. We have records from his son. We have records from contemporaries. We have archaeological evidence of him existing. The evidence is more than conclusive that there was a historical Augustus Caesar. Then there was just a legend built up around him.
Right, but the
legendary Augustus Caesar is not different from the Augustus Caesar that existed. The difference is that the historical Augustus Caesar just happened to have myths surrounding him.
Okay, so with Noah, or was it Moses? Moses. I don't know why I said Noah. I was like, no, I'm gonna say Moses. My brain decided it wasn't gonna do that anymore. But yeah, with that, you have this story that seems like maybe it could have happened, but it also kind of seems like, wow, that's a kind of big coincidence. You put a baby in the thing and somebody finds it and all that, right? Or is that? Am I mixing my Bible stories up? Because I've
that was Moses put in
right.
in the ark.
Are you saying that, like, well, even if that's legend, it doesn't really matter because we're still talking about a person that existed? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that
I mean,
right?
we can. The point of a historian is to try and figure out what is the closest approximation to history we can. We have to form Robert Price describes what we do as we form a gestalt of all the information and the evidence that we get in order to try and find the most probable answer to what happened. I think that there was a historical Moses. Do I think that that there was a mass exodus out of Egypt? No, we have no archaeological evidence of it whatsoever. There's nothing in the record to indicate that.
So instead of telling us what didn't happen, tell us what you believe did happen.
I believe that Moses was likely either of Egyptian or Midianite origin. He had, based off of his Egyptian name. I think that given and the reason I think that is legitimate is based off of the fact that Israel was controlled by the Egyptians makes the idea that their scribes had no knowledge of Egyptian and therefore an air folk etymology unlikely to me.
What did this character? What I'm saying is, what did?
Well, I know I have to. I'm getting there.
What did this guy do?
Yeah, I believe that he was likely a cult leader in Midian of a god Yahweh. We know for a fact that we're pretty sure that Yahweh was not a Canaanite god of any kind. We have no attestation of him in any Canaanite pantheon anywhere. And we know that he was not the original god of Israel either. He was brought in there and adapted. So I think that there was probably this cult leader, Moses, who was a leader of a religion of Yahweh, which probably is where then eventually that ended up getting spread down here. I think that at best we could say he was probably a priest of some sort.
Do you think it was Moses and not Abraham or was Abraham first?
I don't think Abraham existed. I don't think any of the patriarchs did. All of the narratives are filled with anachronisms and actually seem to fit more a theological.
So would that fit in more with the idea that Moses helped author the
No, I don't. I
original, or-
don't think Moses authored a single thing.
Okay, cool.
There's because the problem is that Moses at latest lived in the 13th century BCE, and during that time period, Hebrew didn't exist yet.
But you think he's the one that brought in Yahweh? That's
I think that
interesting.
there's probably a root that makes itself there, especially considering that we have the Shazu inscription from Egypt, which mentions the land of Shazu, and then there's the YHW, which Michael Astor and several other scholars have interpreted to be a toponym for Yahweh.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty credible. And then there's a little bit of other evidence to lend itself to defending that. So I think that and then we also have the fact that with the Shazu inscription, which were probably nomadic tribes or brigands from Midian, North Arabia. We also have the fact that the entire account of Exodus holds that Moses first learned God's name, Yahweh, in Midian with Midianites under the influence of Midianite priests.
Interesting.
So I think that there's likely some cultural memory there, and that what ended up so Yahweh ended up being brought out of Midian as a warrior god, as Mark S. Smith has argued, in my opinion, quite persuasively, and then was brought into Israel, where he was gradually subsumed El as the head deity.
Wow. Well, I think James has better questions than I do. I'm going to shut up now. I'd be like, oh, what about the wife? What about, what's her name? Athra? Oh, what the hell is her name? Yahweh's wife. I can't remember now.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything you're talking about, I've studied, but this was years ago. I took religious studies and all of that. However, a lot of what you're telling me, I've never heard before. So what you're telling me is not the consensus, so I can't really speak to this. But El and Yahweh were mixed together. If the consensus are two gods, so that doesn't mix together with what you're telling me. So it was El and Yahweh or something like that, and that was brought together. And the consensus seems to say that in the Pentateuch or the Torah, we know how it got put together when we know which, because of the language used, the psalmist and the Deuteronomist and all of those guys, the way they mix the language together, we can tell who wrote what, when, and where, which tells us that there could have been no such person, because you can't.
Well, it doesn't tell us.
No,
it doesn't tell us there was no such person. It tells us that he didn't.
It certainly does, and this is why. If you have a story that's 200 years apart from another, with one God's name, and you've got another story that's got El Yahweh on another one, you've got a 200 period of time with people who only live to be 50, 60 years old. That means that those particular stories came together in such a way that no such person could have been on both sides. So it's borrowing one to go with the other is what I'm trying to say.
I understand where you're coming from. The problem is that the fact that the stories are different from different sources does not then mean that the figure did not exist. It means that there are different sources. It means is that he didn't write any of it. That's basically what all it indicates.
I guess what I'm saying is you can't mix King George II with Donald Trump, because one is 600 years apart from the other.
Right. Well, I'm not really doing that though precisely. The thing is that we do have archaeological evidence to give some credence to some ideas in the Book of Exodus.
Correct.
Now,
but how does that get to Moses?
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Go ahead. How does that get to Moses is what I'm saying.
Well, I will fully admit that my argument is circumstantial. I don't think that it is
It sounds like you're developing it still for your.
Yeah, I'm never going to sit down and say that my argument is circumstantial or is conclusive for the existence of Moses by any means. I just think that it leads to Moses
really interesting stuff.
And the reason why I mention this, is there is a book I did read, and I'm going off of, you mentioned Robert Price, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and you know that he wrote a book about this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably got it on his shelf back there.
And I can't remember exactly, but there's a picture, a black and white picture on the cover, and he pretty much argues that this never happened. So you've read this book, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm going off, and that what he's painting is there's no reason to believe this wasn't made up full cloth. But
yeah,
but I'm not in the level that you are. I just only know what Robert Price wrote.
Christopher's going to blow Price out of the water. That's what he's going to do.
I absolutely love Price, and I've actually been.
Whatever you're doing, don't do that. Whatever that was, don't ever do that again. Don't scratch the microphone again. Don't do it. Okay.
All right. So you wanted to ask me a question. Go ahead. What's the question?
So so the theory for the composition of the Pentateuch, are you ascribing to the documentary hypothesis, the JPDE?
Yes, and I also understand that is now under review, but that's the one that I studied years ago.
Yeah. Since basically the 1990s, it's no longer the consensus view.
That's what I just told you. I know it's under review. However, here you said you were a skeptic, right?
Yeah, I ascribe to the fragmentary hypothesis.
That's not what I asked you. You're a skeptic, right?
I don't like using the term skeptic.
Well, I applied the word skeptic to it.
Yeah, I don't particularly like using the term skeptic because it is a very, very specific philosophical term.
Okay, so this is the reason I preface it this way, because I'm very consistent in what I do. Let's say that we start to question as an example, the Big Bang Theory, right? Because the Big Bang Theory is being questioned does not mean we get to replace it with what's being considered. So until there is a hypothesis or a theory that replaces the one, you don't get to replace it with another. That's how it works in skepticism.
Well,
meaning, that's how skepticism works. That's how it's defined. Meaning, we might start questioning what happened in the Big Bang Theory, but you don't get to propose another theory until it can answer as many questions as the previous theory does. So,
or unless you can show the previous theory is inadequate and disproven.
No, that's not how it works.
No, because if you
cannot replace it.
If you can disprove the previous theory, then it is no longer valid to use that previous theory.
Correct, but that doesn't validate the one that hasn't been proven.
Well, correct, but at that point, it's not a theory scientifically.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean,
so
like
I would say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, never mind.
You see where I'm going with this, right?
I see where you're going with this, but what I'm saying is not actually challenging theories on the construction of the Pentateuch.
Right. So
nothing I'm saying is replacing any current models.
So the original question is why should we assume that there is an actual historical figure like Moses? And then DM basically used the concept of the same way we would question whether Jesus actually existed as a historical figure. So.
Right. Well, I would say we shouldn't assume anyone existed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it's right to do that. That's why I did put forth my argument. Now, I prefaced and I did say my argument is very circumstantial. So I tell people, feel free to dismiss it because it's circumstantial. I just have a preference that I think.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I wouldn't use the word dismiss because as skeptics, we don't dismiss things. We just set them aside until we have a little bit more information to bring it back out onto the table and examine it. Because dismissing things out of hand is actually quite rude. I would never do that.
Right. But basically I'm not trying to. The only time I think that I'm going to ever try and pursue going after any established theories is like maybe in talking about like dying and rising gods and stuff like that. But I'm not trying to propose any paradigm shifts or changes of our current understanding of how the Pentateuch was developed, or really much of anything. Whether or not there was a historical Moses really doesn't change the fact that we know that Yahweh likely came out of a cult somewhere in Edom or Midian.
And see that I have no I have no argument against that. It's when he's thrown in the mix of the entire Torah. And so I go back to the beginning. So when you were discussing the concept of Hebrew and the concept of culture, if you speak to a rabbi, they pretty much focus on the Torah, what they would call the eternal Torah, right? So that's theology, right? So they're going to focus on this actually being centered around something very, very concrete. And they have to point to Moses, because if you pull Moses out of it, your foundation just crumbles. So how are you going to mix Hebrew with this? So that was my original question. Okay. Ultimately, with your PhD, where are you going to go with this? Because it's very interesting, actually.
Yeah. So, like,
I mean, to me, it sounds like this is going to be your PhD. I could be wrong.
Oh no, I have very different ideas for my PhD.
Oh, okay.
But no, I mean, the way that I would talk about this in the regards of the Hebrew is looking at things like those peculiarities with Moses's name and how they decided to use language in regard to Moses. For like at this point when we're talking about the Torah, whether or not there's a historical Moses for me is by and large irrelevant.
So you just want to know the etymology of the name, correct?
It's going to be talking about more than just the name. It's going to be talking about how do they use the name? What is the significance of his name within the culture, within the context of the passage? Why does it have this? Why is it that they have reduced his name only to Moses instead of and taken out the what would have likely have been a theonym attached to it? Because Moses was never a name on its own. It was always attached to a theonym.
Right.
So what's the significance there? It's looking at the significance of the Hebrew and that Egyptian loanword and how they've decided to use it, because that tells us so much about their culture and how they were thinking and how they were processing this loanword, how they were processing Moses as a character, how they were processing the stories and the traditions they had developed just by the way they use Hebrew itself.
Right. Do you one last thing, and then I'm going to bow out of this and just listen. But here's the thing that Price throws right in the middle of this whole thing, and I'll ask you this question. It's kind of rhetorical, but what is the biggest problem with Moses and his language? And the answer is, when we read the Torah and using Moses as a character, we understand one strange thing about him. He was a little bit retarded. Are you aware of that? He couldn't speak correctly. So when in their culture, they developed a character that did not actually speak. So when Moses came down the mountain, he didn't speak. When he was around people, when he was there in speaking with Pharaoh, he didn't speak. Aaron spoke for him because he stuttered. He couldn't speak correctly, and he actually this is what this is what Price points out is what's going on with this guy.
Well, wait, isn't that like you could be like, oh, it's the principle of embarrassment? They wouldn't possibly have made him up that way, so he has to be real.
Well, let's not talk about the criterion of embarrassment. That's one of the most unique criterion ever.
No, but
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead with that.
So Price pretty much brings up the fact that the actual mouthpiece in the center of this is like using a straw man. Moses was a straw man, according to Price, because Aaron is the one that did everything and said everything. And they used the concept of a Moses as a straw man. That's Price's argument.
Yeah,
And
I'd say
how
that's missing something deeper, though.
Okay, but the reason we know this is because at the very beginning, when he's introduced, we see that he argues with God. Why are you choosing me? I can't even speak.
Oh.
Right.
Remember this?
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm going through Exodus on my channel right now.
See, so this was Price's argument. We've got a big problem with.
That's interesting because I don't remember the story being that way.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not. I think that what Price has done though is he's missed something very important about the story, and it's not that the problem is that the idea is not necessarily focused on the fact that Moses has this inability as much as it's actually talking about it's actually relating this concept of intermediary. And that's why Aaron becomes the first of the priests.
He physically could not speak right.
Remember. I know that, but remember also later in Exodus, when Moses complains about his speech, God says, "Take your brother Aaron; he will be your mouth. You will be a god to him."
Correct. So
now that parallel is setting in juxtaposition how priests are going to act later. Priests act as the mouthpiece and the intermediary between God and the people. Hence, Aaron acts as a intermediary between the people and Moses, who is, by God's own admission, a god to Aaron.
Okay, but doesn't this kind of indicate that because we're setting up a situation where we're trying to get to a punchline that the actual person would not exist? Because
no, it does not. It's not an indication of any such thing. By that logic, I could say the same thing about George Washington, because most of his stories are written in an archetypal form.
Correct, but we don't have an indication where. See, I would disagree, because we're not talking about, well, we want the president of the United States to be X, Y, and Z because we know that he chopped down a cherry tree, which means the cherry tree was really a story to get to where we wanted to go. And by parallel, what I'm saying is you're starting off in the beginning with a story with someone who doesn't want to do this because he has a problem. But what we see is there's a goal. There was a reason for this, which tells us that in all likelihood, this would not have actually occurred, meaning there was no person to set this up.
Contrived.
I realize that, but we have the same thing happening with our presidents. There is an entire legend about George Washington ascending into heaven.
Correct.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there is.
About a punchline. And
but it's a punchline. I know we're talking about a punchline. But
this is how.
But the thing is that the way that these myths and punchlines develop is not even always by a deliberate means. Lots of times, myths and legends develop because a historical person is lost in the mix of his own legends.
But why add such a very strange thing to it? Like, if this guy had 6 arms and 6 legs, well, what? Wait, what? You see the problem? It's something that is very, very odd.
I realize that, but it's also very odd to say that Augustus rose into heaven, could heal people, was the son of a god, blah, 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 blah.
This is after the fact, not before the story starts, because we start the story with a guy who just can't even speak.
Well, hold on.
You get what I'm going with this?
I know, but you're missing my point.
Okay, the point again?
So my point is that just because we have a story that has a punchline and is set up in a literary fashion, that does not mean that the characters it centers around are fictional. It means that the stories about them
Why would we do that?
We cannot. It's a false conclusion. We cannot come to the conclusion that just because the stories are fictional, that the characters they are about are fictional.
If I'll agree with that.
I can conclude every ounce of the Gospels are fiction. That does not mean Pontius Pilate did not exist. Correct. We have an inscription proving he existed. And everything written in the Gospels about Pontius Pilate is done to set up a punchline. Every single thing.
Correct. That's how we know Pontius Pilate didn't exist at the time. However, we do know this.
No, we don't. Oh,
yes, certainly do.
We know for a fact he existed. We have a stone inscription dated to the time of his reign in 36 AD.
I would have to disagree on this particular point. Pontius Pilate was not around. It was a different governor at the time. And we know Luke wrote this. We know why Luke wrote this. He was trying to he had a story he had to get to. He didn't understand.
You're talking about Quirinius.
Okay,
Correct.
guys. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was like,
I'm talking about Pilate, not Quirinius. Pilate is in all 4 of the Gospels, and Quirinius is only in Luke. But Pilate is still. But Pilate, we know for a fact, existed in Judea at the time because we have a stone inscription attesting to this.
As a joke, somebody said that Moses was stuttering have costed the Jews dearly. God offered the choice of any country in the world. He was giving him a rich Canada, but all Moses could manage to utter was Cana.
Right. That's my point.
But at any rate, you said that Moses' name was Egyptian, and I was thinking, well, then isn't the answer possibly that they introduced this guy just to try to lure Egyptians into the religion?
No, because Egyptian religion was not about missionary work.
No, I mean the people writing the Jewish people were trying to lure.
Jewish religion was not about missionary work. They didn't really care that other people came and joined their fold.
It
was only important.
I thought that developed later. I thought that was developed later.
No, that's basically. There was never this huge goal of evangelizing everyone. That's a Christian thing. That's why Christianity was so successful.
So I was like, well, there's an easy knockdown answer, and we're done, and who cares? We'll move on. But I love this stuff with history because this is stuff I remember learning history, and I don't remember a damn thing about it. I remember we learned it. I don't know. I don't remember a damn thing we learned because it was so boring and dull. It was blah blah died and whatever to the date and so whatever. What tell me about how do we even know that these people existed in the first place? And that's what this sort of talk is trying to get to the heart of. It's well, it's one thing if you have a mundane character the characters in Gone with the Wind. Any of them could be real historical people, right? But there's a method that a historian would use looking at that book, not knowing, and be able to decide that person never existed, right? Or is it
That's correct.
Has it become whoa. Ah! Don't do what the hell?
Not me.
Stop it.
It's not me.
Okay, there it goes. Horrible noises.
Yeah.
Is
that's
it
right,
that?
Because
are we at that level with history yet, or are we still
Well, if we use Luke as an example, he did not write like a historian did at the time, so it's not history. It was never intended to be history.
No, that's not true.
Well, no, that's not what I was asking.
Because they don't write like a historian of the time does not mean they did not.
That's a classic argument that a historian, the two people that you've mentioned, is where I'm getting that from. They're going to tell you specifically.
Yeah,
we know Luke did not write this as history because at the time, historians wrote a certain way. Luke did not write this way.
Yeah, but that's under the assumption that Luke is in the same line of historians.
Yeah, he might not be writing as a historian, but that doesn't make what he's writing not be history, right? Yeah.
Because I'm just gonna point out that yes, while Dr. Price and a few others hold that position, they are in a minority.
That's a fallacy for sure.
Well, it's not a fallacy. That's just saying that
you are. I'm just. It's not a fallacy. I'm pointing out that the majority of historians do regard Luke as trying to write a historical biography. The vast majority.
Never heard this. Never heard this.
Okay,
I could point to several. I could point to several books on it. if you
And
want.
the reason why we do this is because where did Luke get most of his information?
What are we on now? Hold on. The ancient stone megalith proved what was known was wrong all along. I don't know what Tiger Dragon is talking about in chat.
I am
Is
completely.
that like, are they having their own talk
aware
over
of.
there?
We have a lot of megaliths. I don't know what ones he's.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Okay, yeah. Trying to.
Uh,
Okay, let's get.
with
Go
Luke.
ahead.
With Luke, he gets his information a lot of it from Mark.
How much?
He also possibly gets. We know for a fact that he had a shared source or document between himself and Matthew, the Q document.
Which is no longer considered correct. Continue.
No, actually, the vast majority of New Testament scholars hold that, including most fringe scholars, even like Price.
I just read that they didn't about a month ago.
Yeah, and I think you're just reading.
That's changed. No, this is
that's
Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman holds to Q.
Not anymore. No, he's changed his mind.
I am on his blog, and I followed him quite.
Go ahead and ask him. Okay, the point is how much did Luke borrow? How much did Luke borrow from other sources? Percentage-wise, would you guess?
Well, hold on. Let's. We're kind of skipping around a bit. Let's narrow down to the resolving who said what, where, whatever. Because I don't know what's the most important to resolve, and you guys are bouncing back and forth.
Well,
yeah.
Roughly what most scholars come for a percentage is that 41% of his content was found in Mark. 35% of it is his own unique material that we don't know where he got that from, and then 23% of Luke is shared with Matthew.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do the consensus of scholars say a historian sources that way? The historians at the time, would they have written history that way? Or would they have sourced it?
Well, they source it when they have names attached. There are times where ancient historians that did not have names for their sources did not actually name their sources.
Okay, so my final word on this is from what I've recently read that he's not considered a historian because even at the time, historians still acted in a mostly honest manner, and he didn't do any of the things that they did. So in no way could he be considered a historian. He's borrowing from stuff we know is totally made up, and that's not what a historian would do.
Well, we don't know that it's totally made up. That's just an assumption.
Well, I think there would be parts we could say we can
definitely say that there are definitely elements that are made up in the gospel,
right.
But to try and argue out of hand that they were out, and I've been looking at Bart Ehrman's most recent stuff on Q, and in 2019 he has a blog where he affirms that he still holds Q.
2002?
2019, this year.
Okay, I'll have to look this up, and then I'll get back to DM on this. Yeah, but hey, guy, I was wondering, because James had said that he had studied this a while back, and I'm wondering, Christopher, what would you recommend to study now, since these things have been kind of updated to get him back on or whatever, because he loves to read.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, the most recent studies on there currently the head who opposes Q is Mark Goodacre. Mark Goodacre has a few books out where he argues against the existence of Q. I think that his most comprehensive one was from 2002. It was the case against Q, studies in Markan priority and the synoptic problem. On the other side of it, there have been also innumerable studies that have been done in favor of Q. Trying to think of what one of the better ones is off the top of my head. Let me look up here.
Yeah, so I readily admit that I'm behind on this 5-10 years on this.
Yeah, I was like thinking
the,
about that.
the critical edition of Q is one roughly from the same time period as Good Acres. It was written 2 years previous to Good Acres' book.
I'm just wondering, as an aside, like how much of, although this is good to have, debate and all that, of course, because it educates everyone. I think because it's like, okay, this is how, well, whatever. Like I want to talk about debate. It's like I wonder how much could be because like James is simply out of touch with, out of date with, it's like the only reason you're objecting is because what you learned is no longer relevant. Like, no, but what, it's like, oh man. But it's so funny with, like I was saying with history. See, my assumption is like, well, history never changes. It's always the same stuff. That's not true. We make discoveries, and so it's gonna, we're gonna have to update like what is it called? Like the theory? Is it the theory of history? I mean, what is it called? Like I was saying, like when you look at the Gone with the Wind and you know what it is by how it reads,
History deals with a lot of various different methodological approaches. Like they pull from archaeology, they pull from anthropology, or various forms there, and linguistics. There's not really a comprehensive theory of history per se.
It's one of those things we have to. I know that with creationists and whatnot, or not just creationists, but a lot of these people that believe in weird stuff, that they'll say, well, you can't, if you can't be sure about this, then you can't be sure about anything. Like, and it's like, well, but if we impart, like with the biblical story of Jesus, the parts I have to be skeptical about are the magical stuff, the supernatural stuff. And then I treat all the other history things that have that in the same genre of myth or mythology. And is that still valid, or has that been updated? Like, just because it has a element, or just because it's like, well, something happened there that we don't ever see happen today, like somebody coming back from the dead or whatever, does that automatically regulate it to mythology? Or
no, it does not necessarily. When we talk about a myth is a very specific category that we have to deal with. Myths are generally stories that are meant to have some kind of etiological nature, for example. So no, just because something has a supernatural or unattestable element in it does not necessarily mean that it then goes into the whole thing goes into a category of myth. If we did that, then we'd have to throw out the biographies of Plutarch and all the historical documents of every ancient historian ever. Herodotus makes use of various different literary themologies like ring cycle and stuff like that. He may try to actually euhemerize Hercules and provide a human genealogy for him. Plutarch and other people recorded how Alexander the Great was born from his mom copulating with a snake. Another person recorded how he was born because Zeus struck his mom with lightning. I mean, just because they have these myth elements does not mean that they automatically go into a category of a myth, because myths in culture have a very specific meaning and context to them.
Mom, I think I can get him to answer your question here. You've read Richard Carrier, isn't that right?
I'm gonna be right back. Go ahead.
Yes, I read Carrier extensively.
Go ahead, since you know this way better. I did read his two last books were just too long. But go ahead and explain to anybody listening how Carrier is pushing for a paradigm shift. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Go ahead.
Yeah, so Carrier is trying to push for a paradigm shift in a more standardized form for historiography.
How is he doing that?
Well, he does it primarily by arguing off of Bayes' theorem.
Right.
It's a theory of probability. Now he does make a note in proving history that we do not actually have to use the theorem itself, just abide by the rules and axioms of Bayesian analysis.
Do you agree with this?
I do to an extent. I do not agree with his use of Bayesian probability in and of itself.
So you're a little bit skeptical. Is that?
Yeah, I am very skeptical. I am in line with I've checked his work and actually asked my conclusions on it to be checked with probability theorists at my university and at 2 others, and none of them think that the way he applies Bayes is correct. Virtually no one does.
I'm agreeing with you on this one because I read this book. It was just so hard to get through. He tried to make it for the layman, but it's still. But I'm skeptical whether you can take his Bayesian theorem theory, is what I would call it, and figure out whether something's historical or not. I don't know that that's.
Yeah, the problem is the subjective element of it. So, for example, one of the main things that you have to do before you actually get into the probability itself is you have to establish a reference class, and he uses the Rank-Raglan hero archetype. So, you know, like the hero is born of a virgin, blah 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 blah. It's a 22-point list. On it, one thing he does is he proves that it's actually not that useful because he alters it to make it more generalistic. So, for example, the original Rank-Raglan says that you had to be born of a royal virgin, royalty specific.
Okay.
Carrier alters it so that you only have to be born of a virgin regardless. So he he continuously alters them down until, you know, basically until they can fit Jesus really well. So it proves that the archetypes are completely subjective. So his reference class is already on specious grounds. And then also, because there's no hard and fast numerical value to anything that's used like historical documents, when he tries to assign values to how we interpret, like, for example, how do we count something in favor of history or not? He has like a scoring system for it.
Right. So essentially a sliding scale. Yeah.
Right. Well, the scale's completely subjective, and every number on it's completely subjective. Ultimately, what he hasn't actually told us anything about history.
Right. So from DM's question, how would you? DM's questioning how we're questioning history. So what could you? Because you're the expert here, and I'm going to acknowledge that. How would you take what Carrier is proposing and mix it with the old to come up with a better way to figure this out?
I think that Carrier has the right idea, especially in a lot of his axioms and his rules that he sets up in proving history. Rules like trying to source the most recent documentation available, trying to making sure that we can cross-reference all of our information with the primary sources in their original languages so that we know what we're saying makes sense according to what we have documented. Making sure that when we cite sources and everything, we make sure that they agree with that what we're citing agrees with us. And then there's several axioms that he has about different methodological rules as well. I think that taking a lot of those methodological rules and axioms and applying them to history would be very useful for setting up a standard methodology that we most desperately need. And so it's actually the focus of a book that I'm working on. It's the methodology for assessing parallels in literature.
See, that sounds like a more interesting book than what was the guy going to call his book? The Life versus Atheists or something like that. I think he's going to call it. He's gonna prove if he can knock down abiogenesis, then knock down atheists because I don't know.
How's it going to knock down atheists? Abiogenesis is still a hypothesis.
Because
that's theory phase yet.
He says it's either a mind or it's by blind chance. And I'm like, what about the part you keep missing? The natural selection. Okay, blind chance, natural selection, or it's a mind. I'm like, okay, great, it's aliens. Now what? And he's like, well, there you go. At least you agreed to mine. I'm like, it's not a victory though. You didn't
No.
win. I'm like, and I said there could be a third option. He's like, well, what is it? And I was like, I don't have to come up with it. There could be one. Or maybe it's just I don't know. It's just like, well, if you do it, it's like, oh man. Anyways, you guys could have been there. It was great. You'll have to watch it later and comment, and nobody does it. But now we're having a much more better conversation. My brain hurts, so I can't contribute anything to this. Talking about history, I don't know anything. Go back to the mech warrior stuff. I was doing fine there.
So
now we have an
Christopher,
audience. I don't care anymore.
So Christopher, did you appreciate my questions? I was doing my best to get you to say what you did. Okay, because I'm. Go ahead.
I very much did, because it's honestly, I don't have. I will say thank you for the compliment of saying that I'm an expert. I do not hold that myself by any.
No, you're smarter than I am about this.
But I love having these good conversations, because they're hard to come by.
We have to ask James a bunch of questions. It doesn't even matter if he knows anything about it. We just have to ask him a bunch of questions. Otherwise, it's not fair.
Could you be wrong about everything you claim to know?
No. We're supposed to ask you questions. Ask him some questions.
Oh my
matter. Just ask him something. Do it. It's my show. Do what I want.
Well, we could have a really fun conversation just about knowing things, because I'm in a very minority position there, because I'm a Pyrrhonian skeptic.
Oh my! I wrote a treatise on Psi 10 Brudenkate. That guy, oh my god!
See, the thing is that Psi 10 would never manage to get anywhere with me, because since I'm a Pyrrhonian skeptic.
How do you know that?
Sorry. I take the position that we cannot ascertain whether or not knowledge is possible. And
are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? I'm going to try to I'm going to try to teach you something. Psi does have an out, and most people miss it. And most people forget the question that everything he does is based upon. So with regards to knowledge. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him, but this is how he does it. He would say, this is what he would say to you. This
how
is
do
his
you
question.
know that you know?
No, it's a really killer question. And it's based upon hard solipsism from a university level philosophy class. And he says to you, Christopher, is it impossible the God of the Christian Bible could have revealed knowledge to me in such a way that I could know it to be true? Is that impossible, Christopher?
Yeah.
So answer that question.
No, it's not.
That's it. Game over. It's game over if you said that to him.
Yes, is my answer.
It's okay, but if you say no, it's not. It's game over. That's the question that he gets at, and that's what. So I would say that yes, it is. And if someone says no, it's not, that's what he's waiting for, because he'll say, good, can you, it's either a yes or a no, or I don't know. Most people will say, no, it's not impossible. And if you do that with him, he's going to claim that he does. And he's going to claim, see, do you see this?
It's a claim to the special knowledge. It is akin to what was happening in my last hangout, where the young Earth creationist is basically saying, science has to do this, whatever the hell it was. Now I don't remember. But unless and until a scientist or scientists do this thing and demonstrate how that works, I'm right, and there has to be a mind behind it, and that's the only explanation that makes sense and that's logical. And that's exactly what he said. And I'm like,
right.
It hurt me. It hurt my brain. I was like, no.
Okay, go ahead, Christopher.
Here's the one problem I have, is that I don't think that we can say no, it's not possible, or that it's impossible.
Okay. So, but here's what you've done.
Not logically honest.
So I'm not agreeing with Psi. I'm just saying that I studied this guy for a couple years, and most everybody missed that part. And as soon as you concede this, you're in trouble, because you've given him and here's the key word, an avenue to knowledge that you can now not deny.
Yeah, you can't access what he
Well, no,
knows.
I can still reject it just because.
No, you can't.
No,
You can't.
Just because it's not
You're supposed
impossible.
to be asking James questions.
You can't.
Just because it's not impossible does not mean that I am in any way have to actually believe what he says.
Correct.
Well, yeah,
but
but
you can't deny that. You can't say he didn't. That's the problem.
No, but I can't say he did. I have to take an agnostic point of view. Therefore,
correct.
Until he can prove that he did, it's actually of no consequence to me. It doesn't affect me in any way.
Yeah.
That's correct. But he's just using that
considers
as an
that
avenue.
a win.
Right, but it doesn't actually add a win for him because
but he doesn't care. To the audience that doesn't know that much about logic,
correct.
It seems like, oh, I've won because I've stumped them, and all he's done is just shut down the conversation, which is actually his entire goal. And that was on his website for quite some time. I think he did take it down though. That he did hide it eventually. I could be wrong, but
the one where you click through.
Yeah, back in the day. I don't know.
That's right. Okay, here's the second question that may
have
answered.
No, hold on, James. Hold on.
Go ahead.
I'm not really asking you questions, Damon.
Okay, go ahead and ask me a question.
I get this every now and again that atheism is a worldview, and I usually say it's not. What is a worldview? What does it take to make something a worldview?
It's so you understand the principle of charity. So I'm going to answer this via the principle of charity. If you have to ask somebody, what do they mean by worldview?
True.
So if, let's say, a Christian asks you what your worldview is, they're going to ask you, what is the foundation for your philosophy? That's what they mean.
Okay. Because
what's your philosophy?
Say that atheism is a worldview. And I'm like, well, it's part of a worldview. But the fact that I'm saying that is also a worldview.
Do you meaning is your worldview someone who would follow a Kantian ethics?
Right.
John Rawls. That's what they're asking you.
Yeah, it's so hard. I was trying to actually write up what my worldview was, and I love the fact that I asked James questions, and now I'm answering questions. Damn it!
Well, did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, but no, it is. You're right. The question is a complicated question. It's like, because to answer what a worldview is, you need a worldview.
No, you need to know what they're asking. No, you need to know what they mean when they ask you what your worldview is. So if someone wants to know what your worldview is, it's their question, correct?
Right.
So you need to know what they mean by worldview, not what you mean by worldview. That's where it goes wrong.
True. Right. Okay.
This is why I have the position that we should just teach people philosophy so we can all have some fixed definitions for once.
I want to understand that we can't know. What was it? How did you put it? You can't know any. We can't. Not that we can't know anything. How did you say it, Chris?
Okay. Here's how
it's called Pyrrhonian skepticism, and it's the position that we cannot ascertain whether or not it is possible to get knowledge.
We can't ascertain whether or not it's possible to get knowledge.
So, because knowledge is a subset of belief in epistemology, in order to have knowledge, it has to satisfy several criterion. It has to be believed to be true, it has to be true, and it has to be justified.
You're talking about the justified true belief. Is that what you're saying?
That's basically that's what we end up trying to qualify as knowledge. But my problem is that I don't think that we can actually establish anything is true.
But I mean, certainly we have to...
Hold on, hang on. See, I studied this. This is what I did study. All right, so here we go. So what you're saying is, if we simplify this, you're saying that you don't know whether you can have knowledge about knowledge. Isn't that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah.
So all you've done is you've pushed it back a step, but it's really the same question. Think about it.
Like, how do we know anything?
Yeah. See, you've only it sounds like a different question, but it actually isn't.
Hmm.
Well,
But let me hold on.
yeah.
Do you know that you cannot have knowledge? Can you know that you cannot have knowledge?
No, I believe that I can't have knowledge.
And you know that.
Again,
I believe it.
I
Wait a
believe
minute.
it. Belief is an epistemic level above knowledge.
Okay.
Belief comes first and then knowledge. So
And
I
do
believe
you know that? Do you
I-
know that you believe it? Do you see the problem? It goes in a circle.
Well, it eventually does. It's going to be based off of your presuppositions. I presuppose that I exist. I presuppose that I can know my own mind.
Okay.
But
Can you know your own mind?
every single person has to do that, regardless of whether or not knowledge is possible.
Okay, so here's the answer to this crazy dilemma. And it was written in the late 1800s by the strangest person of all, Mark Twain. And he wrote this in a book he called The Mysterious Stranger. And it's based upon Plato's Cave. And what you find out at the punchline at the end of the story is there are no characters at all in the story. And this kind of goes down a path of what is now considered, and it started with Bertrand Russell, that cognito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, was circular already, that you cannot, in fact, know that you exist. That's already circular. It could be a combination of, and this is where he figured out, it's a composition division fallacy, that, like the conscious mind, are you conscious? Well, if you're not conscious, you don't know that you exist. And it appears that we're not. So what is attaining the knowledge? That's where it ends. So you might be right. However, it seems to be circular.
I'm reminded.
Well,
Go ahead.
Here's the problem I'm going to have. So the problem with cogito ergo sum is because it's a begging the question fallacy.
Correct.
It assumes that there is an I before it proves I exists.
Correct.
Now the problem is that every single person has to make an assumption of their existence in order to even get past that problem. No one can know they exist.
Well,
we don't know that. See, this is the problem that
we
I
don't know that
understand.
no one can do that. We know that we might know that we don't have an example of that. Like,
well, yeah,
you want to be careful.
Technically speaking, I don't know anything exists.
Yeah.
I cannot validate that anything actually exists.
I was reminded of learning when I was learning first aid, and we were talking about the heart and how the heart has these 4 electrical things on it that tell it to beat. And I was like, but what tells those things to tell the heart to beat? And the teacher was like, they get told that by the mother in the mother's womb. They're told to start that. And I was like, okay, but then like in my head I was like, but wait a minute. Like, how did that start? Like, I had this, this causal chain that I couldn't, and I knew that I couldn't keep asking the question because there wasn't going to be, that it would keep going back and back and back. And that's what I was trying to get through to the guy in my last hangout, is that you can't always use deductive reasoning to get to the answer, because the answer is going to be weird and not necessarily be within deductive reasoning. Like, many aspects of reality are just so bleeping weird, you would never figure it out just by logic alone. You have to you have to put things under a microscope sometimes.
Right.
So this guy, it's like, the fundamental thing of, like, what is reality? Is reality even real? This is like, I just go, yeah, it is. Screw it, moving on, because it's just not worth my energy. It's too, at that point, it's just like, it's too much. I'll just stick with the rules of logic and go from there, and let the philosophers debate if reality is real if they want.
I was gonna ask Christopher. Your theory is everybody should take philosophy and/or come to some kind of consensus on
I think
definitions.
It'd be better if we all
is that right?
Philosophy.
Yes, just for the sake of ease of conversation and for debate.
Right. So let me ask you, do you believe from your philosophical musings that there's no solution to an infinite regress is basically what we got going on here?
Well, no, there isn't a solution to an infinite regress. So
there isn't or is? I'm not hearing.
There isn't. I mean, the point of an infinite regress is that it does not have a solution. It just goes back infinitely.
Okay, so what I read, I think about 2 years ago, and I'll try to find it and give it to DM later, is that there is a solution. And this comes back to I can't remember how it was worded, but the guy said there's no reason there's nothing illogical about a self-contained final answer. It's the set that contains all sets, but you just don't call the last set a set. It's just that's how it is.
I remember we got into this talk before.
I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah,
it's because this is why. We all in our present form agree that we exist from our perspectives, right?
I think that's fair.
Okay, and there's an answer to it.
Is there?
Well, something is the answer.
Potentially.
Okay.
How can we say there's an answer if we don't eat it?
It doesn't matter. We don't know the answer.
We don't know if the questions are real.
It doesn't matter with the question. There's still that's kind of comes from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So we might not know the question, but still, if we knew the question, we could get to the answer. But in any case, there's an answer.
My problem is that if we don't know the question, how do we know there is a question?
Well, the question already contains premises anyway.
Well, we're here. We already know that we're here.
Well, no, we assume we're here,
and that's what we're doing with this particular thought experiment.
We don't know we are
here. We don't know
we're here. We assume that we are here.
Okay, so I was going to solve it using a hypothetical thought experiment. So, for the sake of our argument, we've agreed that we exist, correct?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's a question of why this exists the way it does, correct?
Yeah,
I'm not totally on board with that question.
Okay, but there's an answer to whatever the question.
I'll grant it.
Okay, so for whatever question that is, there's a potential answer, correct?
Yes.
Hopefully.
Okay, and based upon this potential answer, that is the set that contains all sets that finally comes to the infinite regresses. Whatever that answer is at the final destination, that's the answer.
Yeah, but
because but this moment, it's based upon a hypothetical. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm saying that would be the way to solve the infinite regress is if we can know anything at all and ask why. There's nothing illogical about saying that whatever that answer isn't self-contained in eternity, whatever that is. And that's what Sean Carroll and these people think. There's an ultimate foundation to all of this.
Yeah, we got to talking about this a while back, James, and in regards to the laws of logic, and
that's right.
The point I had made was I think that a lot of logic that we observe is based on the universe that we observe, and so if we had a vastly different universe, we'd have to have vastly different logic. But there's a limit to that you pointed out that I thought that's got to be the case, because if you didn't have a universe, you have either no logic, which you have no rules, and so anything goes, and it doesn't, and then you can but once you have a rule, then that's the rule of reality, whatever that is.
And that is the end of the infinite
regress. You're talking about. You're talking about whatever that is. We could call it a rule of logic. We could call it God. We could call it whatever the hell you want to call it.
That's right.
But that is what we're aiming at. And I think that's one of the things that's why humans are make up gods or believe in whatever, or even become skeptical, because we don't know what the hell that is, but we really want to know.
That's right.
Well,
I don't know if we'll ever know.
Can I levy my contentions?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first contention I'm going to have is, if there is an end to the regress, then it is not infinite by definition.
No, I didn't say that. I said that there is an answer to everything And
right.
that would
so that
solve
so that the
that would,
regress comes to an end.
no, it just encompasses all of eternity. So as an example, here's an example. Let's imagine you tell me, and this is what DM and I discussed. Here's the problem. Let's imagine that we cannot even say that one of the laws of logic exists, and we'll say this is the law of non-contradiction. As soon as you say that in philosophy, you have to explain why it could be any other way, and you can't.
No, actually, we can.
Because
No,
there's
wait,
nothing to
Let
stop
me
it.
explain.
There's nothing to stop it.
There's an entire mode of logic that does away with it.
It can't, because
Yes, it can. There is an entire Hegelian mode of logic that does.
You missed it.
If there's no rules, then what is the rule?
That's right. See, Christopher, you missed it. And DM.
No, the rules are made up.
No, the rule is there are no rules, and that's why I just countered you. You can't tell me there's rules after I tell you the base is no rules.
I never.
Because then all of a sudden you're arguing rules. There's no rules. The rules are your rules are wrong.
See, there are no rules. And even the rule that there's no rule would also not be. So I mean,
that's right.
you have absurdity. But in such a state, if that was how things were, then any and everything possible and impossible could and would happen, and there'd be nothing to stop it, because but the moment that you had anything at all, that's the rule. Is now whatever that is. You have
correct.
Whether it's energy or whatever it is you want to think of.
That's right.
So if you had a literal nothing, like philosophers talk about, it's like, well, and people like to go, you can't have nothing and nothing make something. You don't know that, because in fact you have no rules. If you have no rules, then
that's right.
Then you have Christopher, what
we're trying to tell you, is
wait, I want to hear what he.
Wait.
Go ahead.
Here's a question then. How do you deal with the fact that there's an entire school of physics that does away with the law of non-contradiction?
Are you talking about quantum physics?
Yes, in quantum physics, there's an entire the Copenhagen school does away with the law of non-contradiction. There's also an entire field of logic that does away with it.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm okay with that law dying if it does. But right, it is tentative, I would say. That's why I say law that like I said, I don't know that let's say the three basic laws of logic that we are referring to, that any one of those is the capital law.
Go ahead. So Christopher, I'll answer your question. I studied this with my friend Alexander at Cornell University, and this is what I passed along. He's got a PhD, and he's the one that introduced this to me. The reason he explained that to me, and it's interesting, but nobody takes it seriously from his point of view, and here's why. What you have to argue very simply is the sky is the limit. And if you have a theory that says the sky is the limit, you have thereby said that theory is nonsense simultaneously. And you've just totally wrapped yourself into the most... No one's going to take this seriously, because if the rule is the sky is the limit, that means the rule is simultaneously the sky is the limit and not the sky is the limit. You see what happens?
I'm failing to see.
It's kind of like this.
I'm failing to see how the rule contradicts itself just by
because the rule can contradict itself. Yeah, that's the problem.
No.
Yes.
No, just because there's a law of
the rule is the sky is the limit.
Can I explain without being interrupted?
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Calm down, guys.
Just because things can contradict does not mean they do contradict.
That's beside the point, because you have to explain.
No, it isn't. Just because we say the sky is the limit does not mean that there is thereby a contradiction. Just because we do away with the law of non-contradiction.
Certainly, it does, and here's why: is because you have to explain why it would have been one way and not the other. That's
hold
the answer.
Hold on.
No, that's the answer.
Within the physics and the alternative logics, because I looked at this and I forget exactly. I think I have it on my desktop somewhere. But at any rate, there's a different rule that takes its place. That's really what it does. It says, okay, we understand the world in a slightly different way, so we're going to, of course, update logic to fit that. And there's debate about whether we need to or not, whether, and so in casual and formal debate situations, it's extraordinarily rare that it's ever going to be a problem. In the physics debate, it might very well be you would have to use that other system of logic.
Which one?
Very consistent.
Yeah, but I do agree that it for the person that hasn't, that's not like knee deep in logic, that's going to be like just totally confusing. Like, well, is there a law of non-contradiction or not? Yes and no. Yes, it is in the classical logic, no, in the non-classical logic because of quantum physics, maybe, and you have this potential counterexample. But even there, you have a different rule that's still a rule. It's just a different rule. It's just a different rule that applies to that system and potentially nowhere else, although that's debatable too. But yeah,
right.
So,
but there's a bigger problem that I'm seeing here, and it's that we're trying to assume that the laws of logic have any static meaning. There are several different modes of logic: classical, doxastic, paraconsistent, computer logic, syllogistic logic. Insert here.
Right.
All of them are going to be based off of your presuppositions and how you view the world. All of them are just as good as each other.
Well, they're all good, but in different ways.
Well, that's why I said it's subjective, and it's going. Yeah. We can't say that one is better than the other.
No,
but I do want to point out that it is very fallacious to say that just because things can contradict means that they do.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying.
Well, no, that's exactly what you're saying, because when you say that,
if the sky is the limit, you have to be able to explain why something would be one way and not the other. That's the question.
If there's no rules, that's a whole because
I didn't say there's no rules.
No. But James was trying to explain something else, and I think we got a misfire somewhere. But but I was trying to formulate that, like, in regards to the if we had the absolute nothing void that where there was no rule, what that would be like, and that trying to formulate that, you say, well, the rule is there's no rule, but you can't say that because that's a rule.
That's right.
So you can't, and it's like, well, wait a minute.
Well, no, that's a fallacy, though. That's the reification fallacy. Just because if we say that there are no rules in a place where there is non-existence, you cannot then reify that to say that, well, if there's no rules, then the rule is there's no rules. That is not true at all. That is a reification fallacy. You're treating the hypothetical situation, or you're treating the non-existence as something and turning it into something, which is automatically fallacious because it violates that hypothetical.
But that whole thing that you said also doesn't exist.
That's right. See,
we're in a universe where
in a hypothetical where nothing exists, there are.
Okay, well, moment. Well, how do you define nothing?
That's what I'm saying.
I would say that nothing is the absence of existence. There is no existence. So by fiat there are no rules.
Right. Okay, but we're not. I don't define it that way. Here's how I define it. There's no probability. There's no potential. There's no logic. It's the absence of all things. Now,
mine encompasses that. So
the sum total of not.
Right.
But regardless, mine encompasses that by fiat. The absence of existence means that there cannot be rules, because a rule would be, if there was a rule, the rule would be existent. So by fiat, if I say it's the absence of existence, there is nothing.
Is that the rule?
Again, you cannot say that it's a rule if there is nothing.
But it's a question. It's a question.
You are twisting the hypothetical.
No,
it is a reification fallacy.
Let me say this.
Go ahead.
I think that we're trying to do two things. Like, we're trying to describe the universe that we're talking about, where there's no rules, and we're saying, well, see that universe? There's no rules there, and I'm like, wait a minute, but you can't. It's like, if you point to nothing, then it becomes something because
Correct.
you.
Well, no, it does not. It does not.
Nothing. Like, it
does not become something just because we point to it. That is the reification fallacy.
I know, but that's what I'm.
It's just the way it's just unfortunate that the way we talk has to be in terms of existence.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Is that there's just kind of a paradox of, I don't know if it's because of natural language or if it's because.
Well, it's because we have no. It's because humans have a conception of nothing.
Maybe because it's like, well, what's it like to not be? And I was like, well, every now and then I'll have a flashback because I had this fight quite some time ago. Well, and I got knocked over, but I don't remember getting knocked over. I just remember I punched the guy, and then I was on the ground, and I was getting up, and my butt hurt, for a while after that. And that's all I remember. I don't remember how I got to the ground, or even that I was falling down or anything. I have no idea. And it's like, well, where was I? I wasn't any. I didn't. Did I stop existing? No, because I still existed, but I don't remember anything. So what does that mean? You know, what was that like? I can't even say because I wasn't there to tell you. So it's very disturbing. And anyways, I kind of want to wrap this up because this has been all over the place. It's been fantastic, guys. I love it. You're both very great guys to talk to.
Yeah, this is fun. I don't get enough opportunities to have these good conversations.
Yeah, I mean, this is better than the last one. I was gonna blow this up. I'm gonna leave this up, and I'm gonna make sure you guys can hook up with each other because because you have certain interests that will align and whatnot.
Yeah, actually, Christopher, I'm interested in all the things you're telling me, and I probably could change my mind on some of it. But I do ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, he's not too stubborn. Right. If you want to know anything about James stuff, he's got a lot of stuff he knows. Yeah, so lobsters. So we can all agree on lobsters.
I like lobsters.
Lobsters are delicious.
Smother those suckers in butter.
Why do you guys always take it there? Everyone wants to eat them.
No, man, they're tasty.
I'm fine with having them as a pet. Lobsters are cool. I'm also fine with having them with a nice savory butter.
Look, obviously neither of you heathens have read The Lobster or take it seriously.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Thanks a lot, Christopher, for letting me
thanks,
question
guys, for everything.
Yeah.
And, you can find James nowhere because you can find James in real life, but you can't find him on the internet other than when I have him. And Christopher is online somewhere. I don't know if you want
Biblical History Skeptic on YouTube and on Twitter.
Yeah. So I didn't know if you wanted people to know who you were for real or wanted to keep that.
My name and where I go to
usually Christopher looks a lot prettier, but he's not dressed up right now. So now he just looks boring. He's a guy. He's a boring guy. I like it when he's a girl better. Anyway, bye everybody, and listen until I don't know, lobster. I got nothing. Yep. My brain hurts. I'm gonna hit the button. All right, James left already.